Today, we're going to be breaking down the process and what it looks like when you go to a farmer and buy a half of beef. Now, you've probably heard this term of people buying in bulk or buying a half a beef, quarter beef, whole beef, and it may sound like a very confusing and very distraught process on going through to get this and getting this set up. So hopefully by the end of this video, you can have a little bit better idea and have a little bit more of a simple breakdown on what the process looks like if you go to a farmer and buy a half a beef. First things first, a couple benefits to this is number one, you're going to know that all the meat you're getting is coming from the same animal. Unlike when you go to a grocery store and you buy ground meat, that might be coming from thousands of different animals, all ground into one batch of ground beef and then separated into the little chunks. If you want to know all your meat is coming from one single animal, this is a great way to ensure that. Number two, you're going to have a lot more control over what you get, and you're probably going to end up getting a little bit more of a better price point since you are buying in bulk. Number three, you know exactly where your meat is coming from. Similar to as I mentioned earlier, it's coming from the same cow. You know the farmer it's coming from. You know the ranch it's coming from, and there's a lot more transparency in buying meat this way than there is in going to the supermarket. So let's jump into it and break down a few different ways that you can buy a half of a beef. First things first is there's two different ways that they will typically go about this. Way number one is the farmer and butcher will essentially take care of the whole entire process. All you have to do is make a payment and then go pick up your meat. Number two is going to be a hanging and processing type thing where you work with the butcher and getting exactly all the cuts you want and all the different types of meats you want. This means the farmer will essentially bring the cow to the butcher for you, and from there you will work directly with the butcher to get your cuts of meat. So let's run through these and break the differences down. Starting off with the cut and wrapped version. As I mentioned, the farmer and the butcher will do all the work. The farmer will bring it to the butcher will know exactly how to process it, and they'll give you a call one day and they'll say, hey, your meat's ready, come pick it up. You drive there and you pick it up. This, you don't have as much control as what you're going to get, but it is definitely much more of a simple and clear process. If you're not a big fan of meat or know a ton about meat, this is probably going to be the best way to go because it is so simple and it is so easy, and you won't have to deal with talking to different people, managing different cuts, and going through all the different stuff. You'll lose a little bit of control on what you come out with, but at the end of the day, it's going to be very simple and clear. You'll drive to the butcher, pick it up, and that will be that. In terms of this, you will pay a flat cost per pound fee. So you won't have to worry about a hanging fee or a cut and wrap fee or processing fee or anything like that. You're going to pay the farmer directly, and the farmer is going to take care of all the butchering costs. So you will just have one payment you have to make. Typically when farmers do this, they will ask for some sort of down payment as the animal is still being raised. And then after the animal is fully processed and is ready to pick up, you will pay the rest of it. Now, this range can vary greatly depending on time of year, what's going on in the industry, farmer you're working with, type of the animal. So this is just kind of a very rough estimation based off what we're seeing right now, but you can expect to pay around $7 per pound total. Typically, if you're ordering a half a beef, again, this can range quite wildly based upon if the animal's only grass-fed, is a grain-fed animal, when it was butchered, how it was processed, its genetics, if it's a little bigger, a little bit smaller. But for this example, for both things here, we're going to use 250 pounds as what you can expect for take-home meat when you order a half a beef. So at $7 a pound, this is going to come out to $1,750. So $1,750. And again, that is for about 250 pounds of meat. That's $7 per pound, cut, wrapped, packaged to your front door. The second way you might have heard of buying a half a beef is going to be through a hanging and processing. So if you've heard things like butcher processing fees or hanging weights or cut sheets, that is where this is going to come in. A couple benefits to this and a couple downsides to this. So first off, you're going to be working directly with the butcher, meaning the farmer is essentially going to drive to the butcher shop, drop your animal off, say see you later, and from there you're going to take over and be working directly with the butcher shop. You're probably going to pay the farmer a smaller amount, which we'll get to down here, and then you're also going to have to pay the butcher shop as well. This gives you a little bit more freedom as to what cuts you want. So obviously when you're cutting up a half a beef, there's tons of different ways as to how thick the steaks can be. What type of steaks do you want, right? Do you want porterhouses versus T-bones versus more strip steaks versus this roast versus that roast versus this cut versus that cut? So if you're really someone who's very specific about your cuts and you know a lot about the process and you want certain and specific things, this is going to definitely be the way to go. Again, if you're a beginner, I would suggest staying out of this just because this process can be very complicated. Typically, how this works is the farmer will drop it off and the butcher shop will give you a call and they'll send you over what's called a cut sheet. From that cut sheet, you essentially pick and choose different types of cuts you want, how much of each you want. You're obviously only going to have certain confinements to work within because you're still only getting a half of the animal and not the whole entire thing. There's only certain things you can do with certain cuts, but it'll give you a lot more freedom if you want more burger patties versus more ground beef, more of this steak versus more of that steak. Maybe you want your roast cut in 5-pound chunks instead of 3-pound chunks. Whatever it may be, you essentially fill out that cut sheet, tell the butcher what you want, and the butcher will go give you that customized order. This typically will be based off a hanging weight, is what the farmer will charge you. A hanging weight means after the animal is done with its first part of processing and essentially just the total meat and kind of skeleton of the cow is hanging there before all the excess is trimmed off, before the fat's trimmed off, before some of the bones are taken out. That is what's going to be considered the hanging weight. For a half a beef, again, this can range quite a little bit, but just for this example, we're going to say that hanging weight is 400 pounds. Again, that's not 400 pounds of meat that you're getting. That's 400 pounds that's hanging there before the fat's trimmed off, before the bones are taken out, etc., all that kind of good stuff. You can typically expect around 60% of this to turn into actual meat. So again, we're just going to use the 250 example that we used before. I know these numbers don't add up to it perfectly, but typically you're going to pay the farmer based on the hanging weight. That's not the amount of meat you're going to get, and then you're going to pay the butcher an additional fee. So you're going to pay the butcher a processing fee. So essentially what it takes for them to process an animal, and that's going to usually be done on a per pound basis. And that can typically, again, range depending upon what butcher shop you go with, but typically that can be about $1.50 per pound for your butcher. That is based on this hanging weight as well. So in total, you're going to be paying the rancher for the animal based on the hanging weight, and then you're going to be paying a butcher the processing fee, and that's what they're going to be taking out from you as to cut the animal, wrap it up, and all that kind of good stuff, and get you all the different cuts you want. Now, typically these will end up being about the same price for the cut and wrapped and for the hanging and processing fee. I've seen kind of in general more people getting a little bit better of a deal if you go with the hanging and processing fee, just because it is a little bit more work on your end. Again, depending upon if the butcher shop is charging you more or less if you want different cuts or not. Typically they don't. They kind of do that, and that's all included within the processing fee. Again, you're going to be making two different payments, one to the rancher for the actual animal, and then one to the butcher shop for the actual cost of processing the animal. As I mentioned, because this is a little bit more work, you might be able to get a little bit better a deal out of this. So this example, right, we said $7 a pound. Again, understand this can range quite a bit. This went at $6 a pound, so it's going to be $1,500 total for the same amount of meat. That's one of the biggest things between these two, is you're not going to be getting more or less meat in one or the other. You're typically going to be getting the same amount of meat. It's just kind of dependent upon the process that you want to go through. If you've never done this before, highly recommend just doing the cut and wrap method. Most farmers will offer this to make it easier for you. Some farmers don't offer this, and you have to work directly with the butcher shop, which again is fine. They will definitely help. They understand that people are new to this and typically explain it and do it pretty easily, but it definitely is a little bit more work in terms of figuring out all the different kind of cuts and stuff that you want as well. Maybe you might save a little bit of money and get a little bit better of a deal, but at the end of the day, you're essentially going to end up with all the same stuff. You just have a little bit more of customization on this end. To finish up here, we're going to break down just a very simple as to what you can get. Again, this can go a million different ways in a million different directions based on the farm you're working with, butcher you're working with, but very much in simple terms, when we try to explain to people what they're going to get when they buy half a beef, you can expect a breakdown like this, right? So we're using the example of 250 pounds for this animal of total meat you're going to get. And this is how it'll typically break down. 20% of that is going to be your steaks, 30% of that is going to be your roast, and 50% of that is going to be your ground meat. So whether that gets turned into burgers, ground beef, whatever, that's going to be up 50%, and these two will make up the other 50% of that 250. Now, the cool thing about buying in bulk is typically you will always be able to get organ meat, bones, etc. So if you eat that kind of stuff, or if you use it for dog food, whatever, you will have access to that because technically you are paying for that. If you don't want it, it's not always, something you necessarily have to take. So that's the breakdown for the 250 pounds of meat. Hopefully this gave you a little bit more of a clear example on what it looks like. Again, I know the process can seem very overwhelming, especially if you've never done it before, but it's actually very simple and very easy. If you're a beginner, go the cut and wrap route. Have the farmer take care of it. They know what to do. Butchers know what to do. See if they will do this for you. Pay a little bit more, but you'll be able to go there, pick it up, and be happy with it. Hanging and processing route, if you want to go that route, you will have a little bit more control. But in the end, again, you're going to end up with about the same price. Now, in terms of the bang for your buck here, so the two different examples that we use, right? One is 1,500, one is 1,750. 250 pounds of meat is the example we used, about $7 per pound and about $6 per pound here. Now, if you look at this, you're getting a great deal if you do this. Again, these numbers might change and range a little bit, but if you have to think about it, even if 50% of this is ground beef, if you're paying $7 a pound for farm fresh ground beef, sure, it may not be the $3 or $4 per pound you're paying in the supermarket, but the fact that you know this is real quality, good ground beef that's coming from the same animal, $7 per pound is an amazing deal on that. And on top of that, you got to think you're also paying $7 a pound for steaks. So steaks that might typically be in the supermarket for $14, $15, $16 per pound, you're getting those for $7 a pound. Same with the roast, right? Higher end roast. Some of the roast might be lower, right? Maybe you're paying, I don't know, $2, $3, $4. You can find a good deal at Costco or something for roast. Maybe some of them are a little bit higher, but it really does all even out. And I don't even like when people try to compare pricing for grocery store meat versus pricing for farm fresh meat, because you're really comparing two totally different things. It's like trying to compare buying a Lamborghini versus buying a Toyota, right? Two different kind of cars, two different styles, two different things. If you're buying meat from a farmer, you're supporting that farmer, you're supporting American farming for generations to come, you're getting a clean source of meat, you have way more transparency, way more peace of mind as to where that animal's coming from versus, yeah, you can get a little bit better deal, right, going to the supermarket, but we all know all the different kind of crazy complications that might be coming with that as well. So if you're just comparing on price, you're thinking about it wrong. You should be thinking about it from a health perspective and that standpoint and where your money is going versus just, hey, what am I paying here? What am I paying here? Is this cheaper versus that cheaper? The last real quick thing I want to hit on is sometimes people will ask, okay, if I'm buying it direct from the farmer, why am I paying more than what I am getting in the grocery store? And the reason is simple. It comes down to economies of scale. Typically, these farmers, right, that are selling things like this aren't raising tens of thousands of cattle. Maybe they're raising 50, 100, 200 head, whatever it may be, and they have the ability to do this because they're working with a lot less people and they can deal with that and set all these different things up, right? Versus some giant corporate factory farm that is processing, tens of thousands of cattle a day. They're not going to come to you and be like, oh, sure, come in and we'll find you your nice cattle over here and get this set up for you. So you're going to be paying a little bit more because these farmers pay more to raise their animals and they're doing it the right way and they're not doing as many, right? Again, they don't have these giant factory farms. They don't have these giant processing facilities. These are family farmers bringing their cattle to family butchers so your family can eat farm fresh meat. Hopefully this video gave you guys a little bit better of an understanding as to what it's like buying a half a beef. If you know a farmer, I would definitely recommend it. And if you need a farmer, check us out at dudefoods.co. We are not selling half of beefs at the moment, but we are selling all the cuts of beef that you could ever need from 200 plus American family farmers right here in the Midwest. Hope you enjoyed.